Welcome to my Bob Thurman podcast. I'm so grateful some good friends enabled me to present them to you. If you enjoy them and find them useful, please think of becoming a member of Tibet House US to help preserve Tibetan culture. Tibet House is the Dalai Lama's cultural center in America. All best wishes. Have a great day.
This is episode 302, The Truth of Karma and Being Here Now Under the Jewel Tree of Tibet.
The first two stages of the path. One is the preciousness of human life, endowed with liberty and opportunity, which is the one that we have if we're listening to this. And two is the awareness of the immediacy of death. And each one of those, remember, when we go on in our lifelong retreat from this time, we can spend days and months and years reflecting on them. And we can bring them into our study of biology and history and natural history and so forth. And we can bring them into our experience of life. And so be meditating on them not only in times of retreat or withdrawn meditation, but at all times. So these are the two. And now we move to the third one, where by the combining of the first two of these themes, we've come into this sense of the intensity and the immediacy and the infinity of the moment and the preciousness of the moment to invest in our deepest inner spiritual essential transformation. And being there, we now turn to the third theme in the arpeggio, which is the theme of inexorability of the cause and effect of evolutionary action. How we are being developed by what we have done and what we do, not only physically done, verbally done, mentally done also. And then how what we now do in mind and speech and body will determine how we will become. And the differences and the different forms and the idiosyncrasies of all beings and all things and all worlds, in fact, depends on this inexorable causality of evolutionary action or karma, what is called karma. But it's not some mysterious thing. Karma doesn't mean fate, although in a way it occupies the place of fate. But karma means evolution, evolutionary causality. For example, if you have killed many beings in past lives, then you get a shorter life. You get a difficult existence. You end up in subhuman states of existence, of fear and crystallized paranoia and agony and killing and destruction. If you have taken what is not given, you get a very spare and sparse environments. You suffer and you starve and you're poor and you never have sufficiency in quantity because you took away from others in previous lives. If you commit sexual misconduct, you become ugly and you become out of control, you lose control of yourself and you're exploited and abused by others and so forth in other lives. If you tell untruth, then you in the future life you become where no one believes what you do and say and where you're always confused and you don't know what is true and untrue and so on. So the ethical law in Buddhism is like a law of nature. It's like a law of biology. Just like, for example, we know that if you train, if you become a runner and you run 5 miles a day, then your legs become strong. It isn't that somebody then rewards you with strong legs because you ran. The running itself changes the structure of the muscle, the leg, and you become stronger and stronger. No pain, no gain. You sort of do things and you pump up, and that's the cause and effect. We understand that in the material reality. And in a karmic reality, evolutionary reality, what we do and what we say and what we think affects how we become. And so ethics is actually a way of maneuvering through the causation of life towards better forms of life, in fact. And negative ethics, or doing bad things, is a way of maneuvering backwards and regressing and degenerating our form of life. So we don't kill beings, for example, not because someone ordered us not to kill beings. Although they might as well order us, and if they were a reliable, useful person, it would be all right to do it for that reason. However, If you just do it because you're obeying someone, and then if you think you can get away with it, you might do it anyway. But if you do it because you know that is going to transform your being, like if you prolong lives, if you save other beings' lives, you will have a longer life. You will have a vaster existence, a more generous, more open existence. If you do it in that way, you have both enlightened self-interest, collides with your ethical sensitivity, and both reinforce each other rather than both are opposed to each other. It's like study of biology, really. The inexorability of ethical action, of the law of karmic evolution. And when we do this, we realize, for example, if I have a happy moment in my life today, it is because I did a positive thing in a previous life or a previous time in this life. If I have a miserable thing today, it is because I did some miserable thing to someone else or to myself in the previous time. And in this way, we develop a very minute sense of responsibility to how we behave, to what we do. And we don't blame others for what negative happens to us. We accept responsibility ourselves, which doesn't give us a sense of sort of self-laceration or self-belittling or something, but rather gives us responsibility, gives us power to do something about it. Because if something happens to us, even an accident, and you just sit and bewail fate, then you're just heightening your sense of powerlessness. When an accident occurs to you, you think, well, I was in the way of that accident. Then you are taking a focus on what you can do something about, namely how you're going to control your existence in the future. So it is a very powerful thing to become minutely and deeply aware of causality and the causal processes of evolution. It also lets us become more and more aware of the interconnection of ourselves, the interconnectedness of ourself and everything else. That everything we do is infinitely ramified and interconnected with everything else, and everything else becomes infinitely connected and ramified with us. And this is really crucial to our positive development. We heard our beloved Baba Ram Dass, for example, wrote the immortal "Be Here Now," which everyone loves a lot. Even if people haven't read it because of being born since the 60s, it's still a motto that resounds through our culture and is in a way very good for the more industrial, mechanistic aspect of our culture where we're being forced by authorities to defer all gratification, and somehow there'll be a fruit, a pie in the sky later after death or something like that. Be Here Now challenges that in a beautiful way. And it's get something out of it now. Be present to reality now. Enjoy and appreciate things now, because now is where you live. Correct. But now we must be careful here. We had reached the now before when we thought of the precious human life, arpeggio theme number 1, and we thought of the immediacy of death, arpeggio theme number 2. Then we got into the vastness of the now. And if you really integrate those two in your mind, really understand them and gain insight into them, you will be here now totally, intensely. But then how will you define the now? If the now is just a nothingness, essentially, because you have an image in your mind that you didn't exist before you were born, and because you have a picture in your mind that you will cease to exist after you die, then the essence of the now is that you are nothing, in fact. If you reduce everything to what is its deepest essence now, that deep essence will be revealed as nothing. Your awareness will be revealed as an illusion, some sort of surface consciousnesses, and the deeper consciousness will just be nothing, oblivion. So those images that normally we think, well, I didn't exist before I was born, we think that's reasonable. Oh, well, if we're a materialist, I won't exist after I die, we think that's reasonable. Because materialism says when there's no brain function, there's no awareness. But actually those two pictures of those vast infinite past and infinite future as blank nothings mean that right now there is a blank nothing. Take this as an example. If you are an ardent materialist who thinks that you will not exist, you will be oblivion, undifferentiated, non-individuated oblivion at death. That same materialist, if they come to a moment of great agony in the present, if they're being here now, and the now suddenly is filled with immense agony because they have a cancer, or they have broken something, or they're on fire, or whatever, then it would be rational for them to take a bullet and blow their brains out. And what they would be thinking will happen when the bullet goes through the brain is that the essence of the present moment will be revealed, which will be that it is nothing. So if you think of that example, you realize that if you indulge in the materialistic worldview which your culture has subliminally placed and conditioned you to accept, actually, even though you may have some spiritual ideas, there's a deeper reality sense that you have that came in from your scientific education, where you think that the essence of this present is a black hole. It is a nothing. It is a radical singularity of a black hole. So then the now is nothing but a being nothing. On the other hand, if you face the fact that nothing is nothing only, and therefore is not an object of experience, it's not a location where you can be, it's not a place where you can hide. If you're experiencing what you're thinking as you're experiencing it as nothing, you're experiencing a realm of nothingness which you mentally have conjured, in fact. You've made something out of nothing, as a dark zone, as a sort of black hole. You made it, and you're then dwelling in it. But it's a complete blanket you wrapped around yourself, and it's actually not nothing. It's what's called a realm of nothingness. So then what is the now that you're being here? What is the here? It's nothing. The now is nothing. So what do you have? Nothing. But you connect this with the inexorability of causation, of evolution. You couple this with the vast ocean of interrelationships, that everything is a vast surface of interconnections. You and all beings infinitely interwoven in an infinite fabric of life. Then the moment is as infinite as you can expand your awareness to encompass. And for example, right now, if you have a very tiny little flicker of thought of the jewel, wish-fulfilling gem tree reality, of the predominant power within relationality of love and compassion and light and luminosity and jewel tenderness and intimacy, the tiniest imaginative flicker of that can expand infinitely to become that in billions of worlds, resonating in billions of consciousnesses of other beings. And if you have an infinite flicker of mind of darkness and fear and harshness and hardness and nothingness, then that can lead to the realms of that and can drag many beings into that kind of a realm and imprison yourself in that kind of a nothingness realm for infinite aeons of time. So this moment is infinity. And therefore, the energy that you have to turn away critically, to see through the delusion of anything negative in this moment, towards making the positive in this moment, even in the minutest way, has infinite consequence, therefore, in a way, is infinite. It's a wonderful thing, a famous verse from the King of Samadhi's sutra meaning scripture or text, sacred text, which says that one who understands causality understands emptiness. One who understands emptiness understands freedom. And one who understands freedom understands the importance of the minute, is mindful of the minutest detail. I say wonderful because we tend to think in our confusion when we're told that there's this and that mystical thing, and then, something about nirvana or something about paradise or something about this and that bliss state. We tend to think that there's some ultimate state that we hope to achieve, getting away from all this suffering. There will be some place outside the world, some sort of vast infinity that will not have any differentiations in it. And we'll be there, though. And then nothing can harm us, and we'll be secure and safe. And therefore we sort of can ignore every kind of minute thing, you see. We become sort of vast and infinite. Space and spacious, you hear people talk about. In our escapism, in our fear, because of our egocentric delusion, in our fear, we reify states like that as being the states of liberation and enlightenment. But in fact, when we really realize the ultimate and the absolute, the void, the absolute freedom of the realization of the void, that freedom is also free of itself as a separated state. And therefore that freedom is free to be invested in the most minute infinities, in infinity in a grain of sand, in infinity in a petal of a flower, in infinity in the tip of a hair, in infinity of the tone and the timbre of the tiniest gentleness that can be extended to another, that can alleviate their tension, their suffering to the tiniest bit, that can open their happiness in the tiniest bit, that becomes infinity. Compassionate infinity, not just wisdom infinity, compassionate infinity that is into the infinity of every being's happiness. So this is the third theme in the arpeggio then, where the first theme, the preciousness of our human life, endowed with liberty and opportunity and intelligence. Second theme of the immediacy of death, and therefore the intensity of every moment of that human life, and the fruitionality of every moment. Now then, this gets linked, instead of being isolated in some sort of a dull, disconnected moment, some sort of solipsistic hiding in some being and some place apart from connection with all beings. This gets connected with the infinity of time and space. The infinite past, since we've been here for an infinite past, there's no beginning to our having been here. We will be here in an infinite future. And we and all other beings intertwined will be in that way. So the now then becomes of infinite significance in seeing that the way we're here with other beings is optimal, is positive, is leading to happiness and satisfaction and freedom, and not to bondage and misery and frustration and suffering. So these are the three: preciousness of human life endowed with liberty and opportunity, immediacy of death, and therefore intensity of the moment, interconnectedness of cause and effect of evolutionary action, interwovenness of all things in infinite pasts, present and future. And finally, the fourth theme in the arpeggio, the suffering of the samsaric or egocentric existence. And here we come up against what the Buddha called the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. That, being misunderstood, gave Buddhism its bad rap of being pessimistic or gloomy, and Buddha the bad rap of somehow being a killjoy, some guy who comes up when you're slurping down that delicious vanilla fudge ice cream and says, "All this is suffering." Something that we don't like to hear when we're slurping down that ice cream cone. So we have to carefully understand this. When the Buddha said all this is suffering, what he meant to say, and he did say in many other contexts where he was being more elaborate, is that all this unenlightened living is bound to be suffering, compared to enlightened living, which is infinite bliss. If he thought that this suffering was inevitable and all we could have and all life would only be suffering, he would have kept silent. He would have probably frowned and looked gloomy and kept silent. Why would you tell someone, if they're imprisoned for life, how horrible a situation they have if there's no chance of their gaining any freedom? You only tell someone, well, actually, you're imprisoned under this and that confusion. You tell them that so that they can understand what's imprisoning them, so that they can become free. The Buddha's great news, the Buddha's great insight was the third noble truth, that there is freedom from suffering. There is an end to suffering. Not that it is suffering. In a way, everyone knows that it is suffering, although different people pretend there's this and that thing that ameliorate it, that palliate it, or that later it won't be. But in a way, it's no news that there is suffering. What is news is that there is an end to suffering, that we can realize that it is only the unenlightened life that is suffering. And why is that? That is not mysterious. That is something we can easily understand. Now we're working in the fourth theme of suffering. We can easily understand suffering. What is the cause of suffering as the Buddha saw it? Every one of us here and now thinks that we here and now are it. I think I'm it. I'm the one, as my teacher used to say, my great old Mongolian teacher, original teacher, he used to say, everyone secretly thinks, I'm the one. They may claim to be very friendly and cooperative and selfless, altruistic, but then inside they really think, I'm the one. Actually, everyone is the one, in fact. But anyway, we all think we are the one. Now, when you think you're the one, you immediately are paranoid. Because you immediately know that nobody else agrees with you. In fact, they are so messed up, all those foolish other people. They all think they're the one. And you know that's for sure wrong. Just as they know you're for sure wrong, you know that they think you're for sure wrong, it makes you paranoid. If you think yourself is the most absolute thing, the one irreducible thing, like Descartes, remember? The one thing he couldn't doubt was that he was sitting there thinking and doubting. That was the absolute foundation of certainty for him. He couldn't question that. He doubted everything else, that he had a body, that the world was this, that it was that, but that he was there thinking, he did not doubt that. And we all feel that way. What sort of situation does that put us in? I myself, all alone, the only one. The whole world disagrees with me. All the other people think they're the one. I'm just fodder for their mill, grist for their mill, fodder for their meal. Naturally, I'm in conflict with all of them. And not only them as persons, time itself. Time comes to me eventually in the form of death and says, you're not the one, you're dead. It comes to me in the form of sickness. It says, you're not the one, you're sick, you don't know what you are. It comes to me in the form of old age, and you don't even know who you are, Alzheimer's. So everything is against my feeling of I'm the universe. My whole universe is me. But the universe doesn't agree. So everything I do is doomed to failure. Pit yourself in a struggle against the universe. And who will win? You will lose. That is what Buddha is saying to us. In that, when he says all this is suffering, he means this struggle of the egocentric person who thinks they're it, and the world is in conflict with that thought and that certainty and that absolute foundation of their egocentric progression through the world. They will always suffer. Other people won't agree. They'll lose their loved ones. They'll meet the hated ones. They'll be tortured by others. Death will torture them. Sickness, old age, even birth is a suffering, pounding you in the canal. Now, if this is the only way we could be, again, I think Buddha wouldn't have mentioned it. He would have said, we have to make the best of it. We have to sort of figure out how to bear with this suffering. If he had gone through his time and his investigation of self and of the world and his deep insight and his deep concentration, his scientific exploration, if he'd come up with the idea, well, that's just the way beings are. There's no way of getting out of that wiring. We're hardwired to think we're the one. There's no way out of it. And so we're therefore inevitably pitted against the world and it against us. No way out of it. So we just have to develop some sort of resignation to that, or sort of balance it and moderate it by this and that palliative. There's nothing we can do about it. Then there would be no such thing as nirvana. Then there would be no freedom. There would be no Buddha Dharma, Buddha teaching, Buddha method, Buddha path, enlightenment path. There would be no such path. There would just be palliatives. But what Buddha did was he looked. He took up the challenge. He said, well, if I'm the one, and I put my absolute effort of being the absolute one into finding my absolute self, then I should find it. Because absolute is not to be obstructed. Absolute is what is real. Reality will come through if it puts itself out to do so. So he looked for himself as the one. He put like laser-like, diamond-like, nuclear fission-like energy into finding himself. And you know what? He failed to find himself. He didn't find anyone. He also didn't find a failure to find. He didn't find nothing as the one. He didn't find that what the one was reduced to was a nothing. He saw through the delusion of nothing, the escape hatch of nothing. He dove right through it and realized that nothing was itself just like a pane of glass, just transparent, because it couldn't obstruct everything. So he didn't find the failure to find either. He didn't find the self. And the not finding of the self, courageously sustained, became the realization of the transparency, the openness of the self, the emptiness of the self, the openness, the infinity of the self. Therefore, the self, the sense of the one, became diffused over the entire infinite universe. And he realized that he was all of the beings being the one. He suddenly felt himself as the universe. Now, if you feel not just the universe in some vague thing like you and the universe are all dissolved and destroyed in some big nothing, and then you can just say sort of you're the universe because you and the universe are nothing. That's a fake, mystical, irrational, fake thing, although you can experience it, actually. But that's not the absolute. He rejected again and again that kind of samadhi or state or altered state, transcendent state as being the absolute. He rejected that. Because it's not the absolute, because it's a state you go into in which you're isolated from the specific other beings of the world. And once it's a place where you go in and there's a boundary between when you are out of it and in it, then it's a state that has a boundary, therefore it is not an absolute. It is a state that didn't exist before and comes to exist, therefore it is created by effort, by cognitive effort, it is therefore not an absolute. It is a good metaphor for the absolute, actually. It's in a way what we expect of the absolute, but even in itself, that is a distorted concept, and it is not the absolute. The absolute, by definition, infinity, like you could not go now from being in a finite realm into infinity, because the infinity could not be excluded from the finite realm you were once in. Infinity is infinite, therefore nothing can limit it. It has no boundary. So therefore it has to be everywhere. So all the somethings have to be the infinity, actually. Finitude and interconnectedness are, in fact, sort of the surface of infinity. They're the surface texture of infinity. Similarly, the world of interrelationships of others and selves, as all interrelated in inconceivable intertwined relativity, is the absolute, is the freedom, is the emptiness. This is what the Buddha realized. But at the stage we're at now, suddenly you realize you're not against the universe. You are the universe. The universe specifically as other people in the universe, for example. Therefore, when they think they're the one and they have happiness, that's your happiness. You and they are one being. You identify with all of them. You feel their feelings as your feelings. And they're not against you. And your bliss radiates into them as their bliss. And it radiates back from them when many of them become blissful into a much greater bliss than you individually could even conceive of. When we're imprisoned within the self-enclosure of self-preoccupation and egotism, and only seeing the world from the one perspective, and feeling alienated from the universe and separated from it, any state of existence that we have controlled by that perspective, controlled by that imprisonment of self-preoccupation, will be suffering. Therefore, there's the purpose of this theme in the arpeggio, the fourth note in the arpeggio, is to free ourselves from ambition for any self-centered state as a desirable state, an ultimately desirable state. In other words, we give up the ambition to become a god still defined as a being that is greater than the universe and different from the universe, and still, therefore, in a sense, finite in relation to an infinite universe. Because even the vastest God in relation to a particular galaxy or universe, in relation to the infinite multiverse, call it, the infiniverse, is still like a firefly, like a mosquito, like a tiny grain of dust. So even a God is crushed, is only nothing but a subatomic particle in the toenail of another God in a different dimension. Even a God who is born in a heaven based on generosity and love and joy, which the heavenly realms are made of, because they enter that stage at a certain time, they will lose that stage at another time. Without realizing it in their joy and their giddiness of pleasure and joy, the gods, they roll over and crush a couple of universes or something. in between bouts of lovemaking or something. And in crushing those universes, they create a negative karma, a negative evolutionary impetus, very, very subtly, that attaches itself to their souls. And eventually that's the seed of their downfall from the heaven. And they become a human again. They become a subhuman being. They suffer in the future. Any egocentric being, from the hell to the heaven, is still the one pitted against the infinite and still loses. So then in this meditation and theme, which is very vast, we inventory all possible conceivable forms of self-centered existence. Take the social world, being president of the US, being a superstar in Hollywood, being a great artist and performer, Picasso, being Jackson Pollock, being whatever you can think of as like an ambition you could have about a worldly state in the human realm. Still look at the President of the United States, what a suffering. Look at such and such a great performer as a great violinist, as their fingers become arthritic. What a suffering. And the most difficult is, of course, to look at the gods, the pleasures of the gods, which in the Indian imagination, Indo-Tibetan imagination, are incredibly delicious from a human sensory perspective. But nevertheless, if you see time, if you see the passing of an aeon as like a moment, when you come to death after even 150-year life, it's like the whole thing has been a dream. It's over in a flash. At the end of it, it seems. It might seem long and laborious at certain times along the way. But when you come to the end, it's like you just woke from a dream. It's like a moment. All of life, So even if you live 1 billion aeons, like a god's life, at the end, it's like a momentary thing, and you fall. And they say that the gods become clairvoyant a few god weeks or months before they die, which is like 1 billion years in our time, because the god time is very slow compared to ours, very vast. And the agony they experience in those few god months, which are 1 billion aeons of our time, makes the whole trillions and quadrillions of years they lived as a god meaningless. But it's hard for us, sense-pleasure-oriented people, to really think of heaven as a suffering. But it's necessary to do. These 4 themes that we have now gone through in the very briefest of detail, again to enumerate them: preciousness of human life endowed with liberty and opportunity. 2, immediacy of death, instantaneity of intensity of the moment. 3, inexorable causal interconnectedness with infinite past and future and present. Evolutionary involvement. And 4, the unsatisfactoriness of all egocentric states of existence, even the most seemingly vast and glorious and expanded. When we really encompass these 4 themes, gain insight, as we now are doing, just tasting the tiniest drop of it together, we feel tremendous relief. Interestingly, far from being depressed, far from feeling morbid or discouraged, we feel terrific relief. Why? When you no longer desire to be a god or the president or a billionaire or a star or whatever it is, when you realize the sufferings of all of those conditions by thinking them over carefully, then you won't waste your time trying to become that. You won't invest in those futile, vain ambitions or goals. You will realize they will not bring you happiness. You realize that happiness comes from realizing your true nature, from realizing your inner bliss of freedom. And you realize that your precious moments of the human life, each one of which has infinite impact, and each one of which is never lost in its impact because of the inexorable causality of everything. You realize that you might as well be free in mind now. You should orient and reorient and restructure your life to be free. You drop out in a way. You become what is called transcendent. You renounce the home of the conventional routine egocentric cosmology, egocentric society, living in the uneasy truce with all the other egocentric beings. You leave that society as your home. You abandon it. You abandon that world. And you enter the world of the wish-granting gem tree, the world of individual liberation, the world of individual fulfillment. You put the full energy of every moment, bit by bit, as much as you can, into the transformation of your soul, the opening of your soul, the chrysalis, butterfly expansion and flight taking of your soul. That is where you put the focus of your life. You declare to yourself, I don't know what the meaning of life is perhaps yet. I don't know fully what reality is yet. But I'm encouraged enough by the alternatives that I have heard from the karmic evolutionary scientific tradition, from the enlightenment psychology tradition. I'm encouraged enough that I will determine to make my life meaningful, whether so-and-so says it's meaningful or not. It will become meaningful for me. I will create the meaning. And that meaning will be love, it will be joy, it will be infinite positivity. Will be the meaning for me and for all other beings. That is the meaning that I will make for it. And I give up getting $1 million. I give up being a big shot. I give up being a controlling of the world. I give up possessions of all of these things. I give that up. I mean, naturally, I don't want to necessarily fling myself in the street. I'd be a burden on others. I wouldn't have a chance to study. And actually, in the ancient time in India and Tibet, I could just fling myself in the street. But when I really reached this warrior's abandon, as Don Juan would have called it, in a Western sutra, when I reached renunciative transcendence, or transcendent renunciation, as the Tibetans call it, the determination to transcend, then you could just go out. Eureka, you could say. I'm released. I'm not after any of this. You guys keep all of it. Except, please share a little lunch with me once a day. You have a begging bowl. You live mendicant. You're shining with relief. The word, monasticism that we have in the West makes us think of some lonely person living somewhere with a hair shirt, all dressed in dark, sort of looking like they're into death in a gloomy way, looking like they're afraid of life, have no fun. Or if they did have a tiny fun, they think it was the devil and start whipping themselves. And we have this kind of really dire thing, like it's a big sacrifice. But in the enlightenment-oriented civilizations, the monastic male and female monk and nun, the vacationing mendicant, is considered a great boon, a great happiness. The word for ordination is not ordination, it is graduation, liberation, escape. You gain this insight and you say, okay, I'm going to put my whole life towards transforming my soul, and as much as my own will resonate with yours, everybody's soul. And when I become fully transformed as a Buddha, I will even be able to directly intervene in the confusions of others and help them become more aware. And you could proclaim that and say that and walk into the street, and people would knock each other out to be the first to give you lunch. They wouldn't feel you had conned them, or you weren't pulling your weight, or you weren't justifying your existence. They would feel honored to support you. You become a true child of the universe, and doing the universe's most essential work, the work of freedom and bliss, the work of discovering of the universe itself, discovering its own reality. So now we have done the first 4 themes on the actual path of transformation toward enlightenment in the Jewel Refuge Tree. Each time we do one of these themes, we gain a little corner of insight into it, or we deepen the insight we already have, or we even imagine the inside of it. All the beings in the Jewel Refuge Tree above us, in the heavenly choir and the heavenly host, they flip out, they get so happy. They shine, they glow, and they glee, and they giggle. And they send more intense light rays down to us, and we glow more with their blessings of light rays, as well as glowing with the blessings of our inner insight. And then our glowing then shines out to the beings around us who feel pleasure and warmth and security and refuge in the power of that glow. And we subliminally send on the rays of the glowing as it reflects to them the little seeds, the little pattern, the morphic pattern of our own new insight about preciousness of our human life endowed with liberty and opportunity. Immediacy of death making each moment infinitely valuable and precious. Inexorability of causality making each moment extend everywhere so that we can find all fruition in this moment and bring to bear all fruition in all future moments. And acknowledging the vanity and the inadequacy and the suffering of all mundane states, meaning states experienced by a self-centered person, so as to excuse ourselves from all mundane obligation, all conventional determination, all superficial motivation and ambition. This then resonates everywhere, and freedom rings everywhere. And as we do that, the beings are so pleased in the jewel, wish-granting jewel tree. Branches in the high tree, they radiate, they dissolve, the tree dissolves, the lake dissolves, the high top of the world dissolves, and it all pours and floods into us in the form of rainbow light, of diamond, of ruby, of sapphire, of topaz, and of emerald. We fill up with that light, and then we dedicate the merit of that meditation to all the beings around us, infinite beings in the vast infinite field around us. And then we dissolve into light, and we become one with them. We and the refuge field become one with them, all the mentor beings. And then somebody thinks, hey, where'd everybody go? And we come back to our conventional site on planet Earth.
The Bob Thurman podcast is produced under a Creative Commons No Derivatives license. Please be sure to like, share, and repost on your favorite social media platforms. This recording is an excerpt from the Jewel Tree of Tibet, available through Sounds True. Music for the Bob Thurman podcast is generously supplied by Tenzing Chogyal. To learn more about the work and music of Tenzing Chogyal, please visit his website at tenzingchogyal.com. Thanks for tuning in, and Tashi Delek.